back, everyone. You're watching We Heart Therapy, the special series EFT Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Belle, aka Annabelle Bugatti. You might see me online. I am the leader of the Southern Nevada EFT community, and I have a private practice here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am a certified EFT supervisor and therapist, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys. And if you haven't noticed, well, if you're listening on podcasts, you probably can't see their faces, but I am so excited. We have two very special guests today. We have George Fowler. He's everybody's favorite firefighting marriage and family therapist. Yes, that's right. If you guys didn't know, George Fowler, our very own EFT trainer and founder of ICEEFT, the New York Center for EFT. He was a FDNY firefighter during 9/11. And he brings that experience with him into the EFT world, and he's super fabulous. And joining with us today is Giulia Altera. I know it sounds super beautiful in Italian, and my American non-accent totally butchers it, but she is leader of the Italian Center for EFT. She's in the North region of Italy, and together with the other EFT trainer, Andrea Pagani, who's also amazing, they run the Italian community. And she's a psychotherapist in Italy, and she helps train EFT therapists in Italy and Brazil. And are you trilingual, or you speak like 3 or 4 languages, right?
Yes, 3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
So super excited to have both of them today. And we're going to be talking about how to reattune or attune to reactivity. So before we get started, Giulia, can you give us a big old hello in Italian?
Certamente. Ciao a tutti gli EFT therapist in Italia, ma anche in tutto il mondo. Eccoci
And
qua.
Brazil too. Portuguese for the people in Brazil. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Ok, and oi gente, bem-vindo de coração para todos vocês, brasileiros que mergulham no mundo EFT ao redor do mundo. Beijo.
Awesome. Something out of heart in there. I heard that.
And I want to give a shout out to all the boys in Brooklyn, who come to this space and enjoy it, all right?
That's awesome. That's your best accent, George.
I try.
Brooklyn Italian accent, right? That's amazing. Well, thank you both for being here today. And so let's jump right to it. So reactivity, this is something that comes up a lot in session, a lot outside of session among therapist discussion groups and supervision. And I'm curious if you guys can maybe both talk about how we would sort of define and understand reactivity, and maybe why it can feel so scary or intimidating for the therapist in session.
Yes. If you want, I can start. Yeah? Okay. For me, the highly escalated couple are that kind of couple, and the reactivity of this kind of couple that really come, and you can feel it in session. It's something that you can feel when you enter the room, and when you see and feel and perceive that every word or look can really set off a chain reaction. So it's a lack of energy in the room, and you feel that everything can just go wrong, let's say. In the height, like in the most common kind of reactivity that we are used to know, but also in the silence, because also silence screams a lot. And this kind of reactivity sometimes can be a bit confusive for therapists, but it's as well very, very, very challenging. So for me, this is kind of an indicator of reactivity popping up.
You said a nugget in there, Giulia. You said silence screams a lot.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Hang on to that, guys. That's your nugget. And George, you're a withdrawer, self-proclaimed recovering withdrawer. What would you add to this that Giulia shared?
Really attached withdrawer.
Securely attached to a drawer. Okay.
Man, we have lots of words to describe the same process. I don't get lost too much in the words, but it really is just reactivity is another way of saying defensiveness. When people are in defensive states, they're not capable of seeing another perspective. They're caught in their own kind of protective, right? The bridge between people is gone. So you have polarization and you have protection. So I think it really is the therapist has to be able to shift how they are present to be able to recognize the defensive nature and the health behind that.
I love how you said the health behind that. That's really key. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. But real quick, I want to join these two. So kind of coming together, I love, George, you're talking about sort of this defensive state where that bridge of connection is gone between the two. And Giulia, you're saying it like it brings this energy with it into the room where it's like everything, even like little minor things can become such an easy trigger to react, but that reaction isn't always outward, right? That's maybe the most obvious form that we see where someone is reactive outward. Maybe they're angry or they just jump in a lot, but you can feel the energy and they're very expressive outwardly. But you guys are saying it's not only outward, it's inward, right? Just because someone's silent. And I think some therapists can get kind of hung up there. They think because the couple's not talking, they must not be highly reactive or escalated, that, oh, this must be a couple that's ready for stage 2 because there's not a lot that's being externalized. And that's not actually the case, that reactivity can be internal as well. So George, can you say a little bit more about this idea of there being health behind the reactivity? Because I think it's a new idea for some therapists that are listening today.
I like science. So with polyvagal theory, explaining when people are in yellow brains, right? When they're in protected states, their ears shut down, they're not empathetic, they can't see their partner's perspective. Like this is what all of us do as human beings, right? Because we're in a threat, something is threatening, we got to protect ourselves. So we're either going to mobilize with a fight or we're going to go away with a flight. But there's health in both of those moves, right? My fight is I'm trying to change the outcome. I'm trying to motivate my partner to hear me, right? Or I'm trying to go away to create safety, to turn things down. But both of those, immediate payoff of both of those moves is it gives that person a sense of control. It gives them a sense of agency in the moment that they can do something with this threat. Right. So the intent is healthy. It's trying to help. The impact is something totally different to the partner and to themselves. But you need to get them in a brain state where they can see the impact. Because right now we want to connect first with the intent of protection.
Right. So you're saying you're really separating out the intention from the impact, and the intention has health behind it, even though the protection, the protective move attached to it and the impact may be a different story.
And just to highlight, there's an immediate physiological payoff to fight or flight responses. The body feels better if I'm moving away or I'm mobilizing than to stay in a threat place where I don't have a lot of control or safety. So it gives you something immediately when you do it. And that's really the only reason people are doing it. They're looking for that feeling.
Yeah, so they're trying to soothe the threatened brain, as Sue always says. You know, their brain is like that alarm bell's going off, Mayday, Mayday. Like we need to do something about the potential danger, whether it's perceived or actual. The brain doesn't really know the difference. It just fires off and says we need to do something to protect ourselves from the danger of disconnection, because we know attachment is wired into the survival brain. So disconnection really is a danger.
And Rich, also just to add to that, why it's so hard for therapists that state, because all the moves we try to do around vulnerability, getting them see reframes, different perspectives, empathy, all of that is blocked when the brain is in this state. So it takes away a lot of our tools, which brings out our yellow brains, which then leads to a train wreck, right?
Yeah, I love how you say that. Like when we try to use the tools in the red brain state and it's not working, that brings out the yellow brain or even the red brain in us, where we might start to feel helpless. And that's why it can feel like a train wreck for us. And we can I think a lot of therapists might even see that as a bad thing. Like, oh no, we're supposed to not have them get reactive in session. We're not supposed to have the cycle come up. And that's actually not true either. And Giulia, what would you add to this when that reactivity comes alive?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I was hearing and thinking because George before said the abridged, and then you, Annabelle, said yes, of course, this couple is protecting from disconnection, and so actually, this defensiveness is a way to try to build a bridge. So therapists usually see the anger as something that can burn bridges of communication and of love and of safety. But actually anger can sometimes be something that we can build bridges. And so for me, my way really to try to, when I teach, when I train with therapy, is like you be curious about that. It's really explore and say that loud that you want to know more, and see the lucky that you have in that moment to have this strong kind of protection popping up. And immediately, this is one of my best experience in therapy, actually, when I talk with my clients and I'm kind of getting out of this is wrong, I don't know what to do, but I speak with them like, okay, let me understand what the two of you are trying to do. I know this sounds crazy because all the world is telling to you that this is just wrong, that you have to stop it. But I want to know these things rejected by everyone. What is the good that you are doing in that? Like the curiosity and openly declare. And people look at me at first as an alien. So usually clients are like, what are you? They don't even understand the question sometimes. And
Yeah. I love what
yeah.
you're saying, Giulia. It's actually quite wonderful. And I think it's kind of maybe can feel revolutionary for some folks around working with anger, because anger, when we see anger, especially if, maybe we were raised in a household with a lot of anger, or, we had some of our own trauma. A lot of therapists, their red brain goes up immediately as soon as anger comes online with their clients. And you're saying like a way to help understand and organize and kind of soothe what's happening in a ways to get curious about the anger, which may feel incredibly difficult for therapists when they're like, oh my God, people are screaming, they're yelling, they're going back and forth. And that's a place where therapists can easily, if they're not careful, get sucked into the cycle. Like their protection goes on and they may step in and try to protect one partner they see as like on the receiving end of that anger, which, that can break alliance, because with couples, we need to hold both. And, also what you're saying is anger, we tend to look at it maybe as something bad. And George is really good about speaking on this too, but anger isn't always a distancing move. Sometimes it's actually a bridge that someone's trying to build on it. Just because someone's angry and maybe they're not saying very nice words, or they could be calling names and hurling insults, we want to be careful to not judge them and see them as someone in pain. And they might be actually trying to get closeness from that move. Like if I go to you, maybe you'll turn and engage with me, which feels better than if you just completely shut down and go away. So at least if you're talking to me, maybe there's a chance, right? And George, you're infamous for talking about hope within anger. Could you maybe touch on that?
First, let me highlight something important that Giulia said, that most people that are in, and it's not anger. I mean, anger is one side of the coin, the other is flight. But both of the fight or flight are the same thing, right? When people employ these strategies, they don't even know it themselves why they're doing it. So when you are curious and you say, so help me understand why you're angry or why you went away, they're not going to know. Our job as a therapist is to make the implicit explicit. This is such a fantastic way of doing that, to empower people. A lot of therapists want to bypass these defenses, but then they go home and those defenses are back in place. And that's why couples keep relapsing. They don't understand their own defenses. So this is super important. But if we're going to talk about the hope of anger, how do we know that? Because when that pursuer, that person who pushes, stops pushing, that's a bad sign for the relationship. Right? They start to become hopeless when they no longer think my criticisms are going to motivate change and my chance to be heard isn't going to work. Right? So that tells us what it's doing in the short term for people. Right? And anger can mean a million different things. Like, I'm trying to protest. I'm trying to let you know this is unfair. I'm trying to be heard. I'm trying to have a voice. I want things to change. I'm trying to get away from my own pain. Really taking the time, that word curiosity is the key. When you're curious, you have a chance of hanging in this space, right? But if your own stuff is triggered, do a whole nother thing on self for the therapist. But therapists do need to really prepare themselves for this. So real quick example, if you're my couple and I say, how's it going? And Annabelle, you say, I think we're doing good. Like, my brain is now trying to attune to good. And like, I'm ready to kind of try to unpack that. But what I should also be ready for is when you say good, that could quickly trigger her brain to become reactive. And she might jump in and say, good, we haven't talked the whole freaking week. Why are you coming in here in line? Like, are you ready for one person's good could set off the other person's yellow brain? And that's likely to happen. If I'm not prepared as a therapist for that, I get surprised by it, then my brain goes into yellow.
Yes. And what always strikes me as important about this is bringing together what Giulia said about curiosity, but really there's an action tendency with curiosity. It brings up the whole firefighting thing, which is funny because you're a withdrawer, George. So you want to go away. But I'm like, if a house is on fire, you're not just going to go away and let it burn necessarily. You're going to go towards the fire with the hose, right, to put it out. And I love what you said, Giulia, about being curious, which is like, can I lean in? Can I not get scared as the therapist and pull back and run out and sort of like try to go into coaching mode or give psychoeducation or jump in and mama bear one of the clients and get super protective? It's like, can I stay and lean in? And to me, I always envision like a fireman going towards a fire with a hose, because whatever my anger is saying, it has to fight to be heard and understood, even if it hasn't totally formulated what needs to be heard and understood, whether it's I'm hurt, I'm in pain, this feels unjust, whatever it is. And the moment we lean in, and this is a practice I found we can do on ourselves, is like, get curious, step into anger. It doesn't have to fight so hard when you're willing to lean in and listen. And then suddenly it just starts to, it's the strangest things. And I think it seems so counterintuitive to therapists, but it is like going into that burning building with the hose and starting to extinguish it. If I lean into your anger and say, tell me more, I'm sure you have a good reason to be angry, then it's like, whoa, what? Mm-hmm. Really? Like, you want to hear about my pain? Like, really? Okay, yeah, I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. What else would you say here, Giulia, about leaning in when it gets big?
Actually, I would like to do a little step back. Like, before leaning in, we have to recognize the fire, and also for our clients, because sometimes they don't even know that they are burning. And today I was teaching with a group of young therapists, so it was not a pure EFT training, was a EFT into specialization school. And it was like, okay, let's just have fun and have a role play with the anger, like start from the beginning. And one of the therapists that was working, she was seeing the client screaming, and I was like, tell her with energy that she's screaming, reflect that, like recognize the fire and help the client. And the therapist was a bit scared to do that because we are full of idea, like also naming anger and naming action tendencies related to anger sometimes are bad, are field of judgment in our inner world experience. This can also be cultural, it depends. So she was like, I don't know. And she managed to say, okay, I see you screaming and calling name. And then I see your anger. And the client was, yes. And the therapist was like, she accepted, she's seeing that. And I was, yes, and now get curious, ask her, and then lean in. So it was like taking curiosity and courage to recognize a name, because also it's very important then to open this door and then lean in. And then
That's really important, Giulia, what you're saying, because I'm imagining with the therapist, and this is one of the big things that comes up with training is, when they do get really reactive and one of them starts calling names, and the thought is, oh, I have to immediately jump in and say, that's wrong. This is bad. Like, you can't, call your partner names. You can't call them the B word. And we're not necessarily going in with our own guns blazing, like trying to take out the threat, because we know that's not going to bode well for the alliance. But what we're also saying is we're not saying, oh, it's okay to call your partner the B word right here in session and I'm not going to do anything. You're saying, EFT, we have this more empathic way with curiosity, but for those that haven't really, maybe we haven't done a good job making this explicit, is that EFT is very confrontational, but we don't do it in a like attacking, hostile, judgmental kind of way. We do it in a more empathic, curious kind of way where what you said was like, I noticed right here, you call your partner the B word, your finger is pointing at them, we're like sort of holding up the mirror, we're in no way saying this is okay. But we are confronting it and saying, oh, I see you doing this. What's going on? Because obviously when that happens, the impact on your partner, how's that going to go? But we are still leaning in and addressing it. So I want to make that clear with you guys, listening, that we are in no way saying it's okay to just let your partners verbally stab each other in session, right? We are leaning in. And George, what else would you say about sort of interrupting when those stabs, or we call them bullets, verbal bullets in session, might start to fly?
We got a whole lot of stuff flying around here. The B word, is that baby?
Right.
So I want to back up to a second, because we're going to use this imagery of fire, right? And I think it's helpful to be curious, of course, and to be able to name that. But we also need to get, like, I didn't wake up running into fires. I got a lot of training to do that. We really need a lot better training on how to work with reactivity. Just think about the sheer number of reps that we get in vulnerability, in sadness and fear, and all the tools and training we get. We don't get anywhere close to that in these defensive, protective moves, which we need to. So if you're struggling with this, it's because you haven't had enough training in it. And a lot of us don't grow up in families where we get good role modeling on how to do this. So, I mean, it's an area that's super important. And the thing my main takeaway of people listening from what I'm adding is, I think a lot of therapists are good at validating anger, but not actually making meaning of anger, right? So if we go to states of connection, people know a lot. I talk about co-regulating affect, co-creating meaning. Like the co-regulating part, I think therapists are getting better at. Like, yeah, I can see right now they raise their energy and I can see you're angry, it makes sense. And then they just try to go somewhere else, but they never actually make sense of it. And if you don't make meaning is the key to actually anger making its point, right? It wants to be heard. It wants to be understood. It wants your attention. You got to give it the attention it needs by making meaning of it, right? Taking the time to do that. And all my years of training, that's the main thing I see absent. And when I'm watching tapes, right, that this therapist say, yeah, I get you're angry and that must make you feel lonely. And they immediately try to go somewhere else. They don't actually take the couple of minutes to make explicit the meaning of that anger.
Like they try to bypass and skip over the anger rather than holding it. And what strikes me about what you're saying is by making meaning of it, it's basically organizing it, making sense out of it, which kind of gives it a container.
It's literally pulls the brain from yellow to green. It's like, you understand my anger, you get my protest, you see what it's trying to do. All right, you're listening to me. All right, I can start settling down. I need them to settle down before I'm going to do anything else. Right. And if I try to do anything else before that, it's going to fall short.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if part of even what happens before that helps the brain get into green brain before we even understand the anger is the signal, that the emotional signal that we send our client is the desire to understand them, which I think is what puts the water on the fire, because I think a lot of their anger might initially be responding to this felt sense that maybe how I feel isn't even cared about. And of course, the angrier I get, maybe the harder it is on the receiving end to be present with it. Because again, our clients aren't trained therapists how to do this. And so even just that idea of someone leaning in and saying, I really want to know about your pain, your suffering, your protest, whatever it is like, oh, sends such a powerful.
Writing that down, right? All you got to do, if you say, I want to understand what you're saying, this is so important and I'm listening, can you tell me more? That's all it takes to get people's anger to start kind of finding its space to start unpacking.
Giulia, what would you add to this?
Yes, I would add that really just these simple phrases, it can be an anchor for therapists who are not maybe comfortable with this emotion. And it's something that can open big word. And this doesn't mean word immediately to the sufferer or to the pain, but word that can also help in understand which kind of anger is this. And if we can connect with what this anger is trying to do, this is also helping us to reflect a most coherent and understandable sense of the cycle they are caught in. So the more the person also is able to perceive their own anger, and also the denser, the more the environment becomes safer and safer and safer. And we can see that at that point, people will start open up into pain, suffering. So it's the phrase that the intervention that George said with the intention of really want to stay with the anger, because sometimes therapists also use this intervention, but after 5 minutes, if peers are not there, they get stressed again. So, okay, what I'm doing wrong? Nothing. But maybe this kind of anger need more space because it comes from year and year and year of whatever didn't work. And so maybe just need that we are really curious. It's not a fake curiosity, but it's now this door is open. Let's really feel it and explore it, stay in it, experiencing it.
And by giving it space, though, what you're not saying is that we're inviting the client to just verbally vomit all this hot.
No.
That's not what we're saying is, oh, my partner's just blah, blah,
blah. No. And usually this doesn't really happen. When we get curious about, as George said, the meaning behind and the function and what you are trying to do and the hope, there are many doors. Maybe at first they start with the partner, but usually they also get curious about themselves. So yes, of course, we don't want to ventilate anger. This is not what we are trying to do. We are really trying, as also you said, to organize it and to create a coherent sense and acceptance of this new way of try to get connection that doesn't work at the end.
I want to add to that because I think a lot of therapists are so polite and want to listen that this is not the place to sit back and listen. When you have two people co-dysregulating each other, when their defensiveness are so big that they can't even hear each other and they're firing away, you have to interrupt that. You have to provide structure to a couple like that, get the conversation going through you, right? I'm going to stop them talking to each other if they're going to make my job more challenging. So just knowing that you have to interrupt. And also, our job is to create safety. If their reactivity is getting in the way of that, if they go from you're a jerk to you're a slut, I don't say anything. I'm enabling that kind of bad behavior. So not only do I have to interrupt it, I have to say, you have to put a boundary on that and say, listen, when I'm angry, I say mean things too, but you're here because you want things to be different. Right. So, if either one of you kind of goes down a road that's, inappropriate, I'm going to say, whoa, hold on a second. Right. This is going against what both of you want. Like, I think it's super important that a therapist is ready to create that safety. Otherwise, we're sitting back and just letting dysregulation do what it wants to do.
I think the key there is willing to create safety. To me, that's huge, because I have a lot of therapists who think that when this kind of thing happens, it must mean that the couple is not ready for couples therapy, that there's not enough safety. And my thought is, if we're waiting for that to happen, they're never going to be in therapy. They're never going to start, right? That the reason they're in therapy is because they don't know how to co-create safety together. And so we're joining in the mess and helping them from that experiential level and the emotional level with how to co-create safety. And we do it on that emotional level because that's the one they have access to under fight or flight. And that's the level. So we're building like that new emotional muscle memory. So I like that for the therapist to be able to kind of run towards the fire and help kind of take the lead to help co-create safety in the room.
If you don't take the lead, the cycle will take the lead. That's the only choice we have. Yeah.
And you had some really good words. I love what you said about, hey, this is going against what you guys both want, right? So we're not, I think therapists get really nervous about, how do I jump in and intervene? What do I say? And also, how would you, any suggestions you have of verbiage therapists can use if maybe you're working with one of the partners trying to distill their part of the cycle, and the other one, it triggers the other partner and they start getting angry and reactive, and you don't want to break mission and sort of get pulled into that, because then you could end up doing more of just what the cycle does, where that anger sucks up all the space and the other partner never gets heard. But how do you sort of intervene that way without getting pulled onto a different mission?
For example, using the word you just said, like, oh, okay, wait, I like reflecting and taking, like validating, but also closing that intervention with your words, like, okay, because right now this is something that is also happening at home, that both of you are trying to go through a conversation, but something is triggering, and then the cycle will take the lead, just putting the two things that both of you said. So like, recognize, don't ignore, recognize, validate, close the validation, and put it back into what usually happen, and ask the possibility, because sometimes also it's just not possible, and so we have to be ready to change the mission. But sometimes it's possible, just with this recognizing, seeing, telling, we are going to get back there at some point, and this is something that is actually impeding the both of you to get through this conversation as at home.
Yeah, George, would you add to what Giulia shared, ways that you might close validate?
Well, you know me and my acronyms. So terror is what I use with escalated couples. When I go all over the place and I try to get escalated couples, they don't stay escalated if you can keep a focus with them, right? So, the T is you got to take charge. You got to get the conversation going through you. If you just do that, you're going to see how it reduces a lot of the reactivity. E is you got to explain why you're doing what you're doing. You can't hear two people at the same time. You can't do two missions at once. You got to take one and then do the other, and you're letting them into your process. R is you got to have that plan. That's what you're talking, to restrain interruptions. Even though they agree, Giulia says, sure, Annabelle, you go first. As soon as you say something she don't like, she's jumping in, right? And if she jumps in and I start exploring that and be curious, I'm going to bounce all over the place and get lost. So I do want to close, validate, say, yeah, Giulia, I see you don't agree. I'm writing that down. When I come back later, we'll talk more about that. Back to work. I'm not going to lose my focus. Right. The next R is regulating, which means matching the affect. This is your time as a therapist to turn it up. Right. It's not slow and soft, like you said before. No time out, slow things down. This is the time to speed it up a little bit because people are in protest and they need to feel that from you.
There's nothing worse than pissed off and someone comes in with their soft, slow therapy.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly. That O is, to me, the heart of it, which is the organizing, making meaning out of the anger. Once you do that, then they do start to calm down, where the last R is the reframe. This is where you can start getting them to see the bigger picture. You get their tunnel vision, you honor their tunnel vision, you get how they're trying to survive, their good intent. Once you do that, it settles the brain where they can start seeing the bigger picture. If this is how I deal with my threat by protesting, I don't really see the message I give Giulia. She's failing, and she deals with that by going away. Oh, wait, I don't want her to go away. So the move I'm using to get her to motivate doesn't actually work so well. But notice the brain has to be in a place to take the reframe. Most EFT therapists are going immediately to a reframe where people don't have the capacity to see it yet because the bridge is gone. I want to build the bridge so they can start seeing it.
Do you guys notice George's energy changed right there? And I love what you said, matching affect, right? Is you're talking about matching the energy of the emotion, not necessarily like my client's pissed off, so I got to get pissed off. That's not what we're talking about. Is we're not saying you have to own that emotion. You're just matching the energy. So if you notice George's energy, even if you're watching the video, the little vein in his neck popped out. Really cool. Just really like kind of picking up your own pace and tempo to match that energy. Right. I almost think of like a bullet train that's trying to speed past you, and you're trying to, like, in a way, jump in front of it, so we can get it to come to a halt at least before we even reroute. It's like, let's jump in front of it, which might sound terrifying, but we're doing it in a safe way and to where we don't get run over. Maybe sometimes we do, but sometimes it may feel like blood and carnage in your therapy sessions. And I think we've all had those experiences, but learning how to really see the fire, use terror, and I'll put the acronym here in the video. I really love that. Giulia, what would you add to this?
I would add something that actually I heard from George, so I'm quoting also. That is, sometimes therapists hear this matching the energy, and they say something like, oh, but I'm not able, this is not my style, this is not my culture, this is not the way I'm working. And George once gave a beautiful example of matching the effect with your own style. So he talked about another trainer who matched the effect in a very nice way, but with energy. Maybe I can quote. Yeah, it was, you were quoting Gail actually, and Gail was like, okay, I see you are so angry. So it was like not your way. But exactly. It was more nice, but still with energy. So I think this is it's something that stay with me, because I'm also more in a nice. I can't really raise a lot my voice, so I had to struggle to find my own voice. And I think it's important for EFT therapists know that they don't have to look as George or as Giulia but each of us can match the energy that is respectful also of our own style and maybe our own culture. In some culture, raising the voice is acceptable, in others is not acceptable, but we can attune and do that in any style.
And the opposite is also true. I mean, there's an urgency to a fight protest that you need to kind of join, right? But if somebody's trying to go away and they don't want to talk,
Exactly.
We have to have a calmer voice for that, right? If you come on too strong to an avoidance strategy, that's not going to work either. So it is about pacing yourself and trying to kind of get close to their experience.
And I think what you guys are talking about is in matching the energy is really an attunement piece.
Yeah.
And, you know, if what I think you guys are saying is be careful that we as therapists maybe don't use the culture or it's not my style as like our own block to ourselves go away, and instead be curious, how can I find a way to match the energy that feels like it honors my personality or my style or my culture, and also is attuned in to the client. I mean, I think it could feel like a little bit more of a harder attunement if you are from a different culture than your couple, and maybe they are the ones whose voices are raising, but maybe you as a therapist come from the culture where that's not acceptable. So finding a way to raise the energy. But I think if you're in our culture and they're getting escalated and you want to match that energy, but it's a culture where we don't yell, it's probably going to be okay because your energy is going to match whatever their energy, even if it doesn't match what maybe anger might look like in an American culture or, you know, a different culture. So, and the only way you really know is tuning in.
Italians don't like to yell. They're very calm. No, but I want to point out one thing because I think therapists think they're doing this as a tool, matching affect, so they can give a gift to their clients. And that's true, but it's so much more than that. It's how we feel our clients. Like if you want to walk in their shoes and help them validate and control all the moves that we do, we got to feel their world. This is a gift I give myself as a therapist when I can start matching affect, right? It's how I get closer. So this is so important to what we do as therapists. It's a two-way street. It's not just something we're doing for our clients.
You're talking about empathy, basically. I mean, empathy doesn't always come in the form, oh, you know, like that soft, cuddly, warm, gooey. Empathy is just the ability to resonate and stand in someone else's shoes. So if they're having anger, right? So I love what you're saying. It's not something we do to them, right? It's not just a tool. It's a way of really trying to come alongside them to understand their world by feeling it through us. And that is the heart of empathy. Even if we're empathizing with their anger or the energy of their frustration or their sadness or whatever's coming up, it's empathy. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I think somebody wrote a book about that.
I know. And maybe that sounds.
And someone will be in Italy with that.
Yes, we're going to be in Italy. I'm excited. Yeah. So I think that might sound even kind of strange for a therapist, like, whoa, we could empathize with somebody's anger. Right. And for me, as I wrote about in my book on relentless empathy, you guys can find it on Amazon. And that's a phrase that Sue came up with, which is deeper than unconditional positive regard, which to me is more of like the cognitive level. Sue's version of relentless empathy, you know, to have that empathy, that never ending empathy, relentless, right? That to really empathize with the energy, the felt experience of someone's anger. To me, that's one of the only ways I can stay out of judgment or getting triggered, is to really try to understand what's going on in their world, that's what they're feeling, that's the response they're in, that's whatever strategy they're using. What would you have had to go through to feel like that's your only choice, right? And when you do that, it takes you out of judgment and it's so much easier to be with, and the client will feel you with them. So if they feel like we're kind of judging their energy, their anger, they're just going to double down in their anger and reactivity rather than start to melt and diffuse. And that reminds me, you said something earlier, Giulia, that was brilliant about ventilating, right? We're not ventilating their anger. Actually, all the research in the past has always showed that, you know, I think it was in the 80s, they used to give them the foam bats and say, oh yeah, just vent your anger, like go out and hit something. And they found it actually made the anger more intense. And I think that's what therapists are afraid of, is somehow if I lean in, that it's going to grow the anger, when in fact it does the opposite. It shrinks it down. And that idea of venting, it's something that I also go through with my clients, where they get stuck on this, like, my partner just comes home and complains and vents, which is hard to hear and hold, versus like my partner telling me, like I can sense the energy, the frustration, angry, maybe from their work day, but they're actually telling me the meaning of it versus just, venting it on me. So there is this difference, can help both us as therapists and help our clients as we relate, but also as they relate to themselves and each other.
Yes, it's also, I think, the heart of this, and it maybe can be also a shift in our clients, is like just be there as a punch ball or being into a conversation. So, and this also is at the end start restoring the connection, because just punching a punch ball that is not reactive will probably trigger more and more the anger that it's trying not to just vomiting, but to be heard and to have some feedback. And so when the other one, it becomes more curious about it and hear about it, a conversation, at least it's starting. And so.
Yeah, you're saying we don't want to still face it. Because if we still face anyone's emotion, we know in the brain that's encoded as dangerous, and that reactivity is liable to get higher and harder, more intense. So what would be your guys's like one nugget if you could have people listening today take one thing away that they could practice in terms of leaning into anger or reactivity? What would you want them to leave this podcast today with?
I would want them leaving with more curiosity around how little they actually know about defenses and wanting to know more about it. I think most EFT therapists basically just see the impact of the partner of the anger, right? And they put it into a cycle. Can you see how the anger, makes your partner feel like they're failing? That's one attribute of the anger that's important. Well, I want to add two more that I want you all to think about. The healthy function for the person who's angry, that's really what we've been talking about today. How do you give the space to help them know themselves and why they're doing what they're doing, right? The second piece that a lot of therapists don't explore is actually the cost, the impact of the anger to the person who's angry, right? So if my anger is trying to mobilize Giulia to change, well, guess what? My anger takes me away from myself. The same thing I don't like that she does. She doesn't engage. I'm not engaging with my own fear and vulnerability in protecting myself. That's a pretty deep cost to self that there's no exploration. So what I'm saying is this anger is a great doorway into some awesome view of self places if you give yourself the tools and the training needed to go there.
That's really good. What sort of comes up to me about your nugget, George, is a little about like damage controls, that when we're angry and certainly I was somebody who struggled with anger in my younger years and stuff. So I really enjoy actually working with clients with anger because of the journey I've walked in EFT and learning to understand it better. It's just been so transformative and liberating and freeing. And it's like, when we're super angry and we're just like attacking our partner, right? The impact on our partner, it can cause all this other damage. And now the conversation gets hijacked and focused on the damage caused by what we did when we were angry. And then the part of us that our anger was trying to speak on behalf, our hurt, our pain never gets focused on and addressed the original hurt. And that stays frustrating. So in that way, I also sort of do myself an injustice because the way I handle my anger might cause that we get stuck on damage control rather than the original wound. And often therapists can miss the fact that the person who is angry is deeply hurting. We get kind of stuck on the impact on the partner of the anger rather than the hurt underneath the person angry.
They focus on their partner as the only solution to that pain. They don't see the power that they have to respond to themselves, which is also really important.
That's beautiful. Giulia, what would your nugget be?
So I think actually, I don't know if it will be a nugget, but I think the one George said is very, very important. It's also the way I've learned to. So for me, the reflection I was thinking right now that for therapists, try to think and to experience also the beauty of the escalation, like seeing the escalation as vulnerability that meets courage and pop up, and it's trying to really create the bridge that it's difficult to. So maybe therapists, they can start. This is something I was used to do when I was learning. Let's find their own opportunity of vulnerability meets courage and explore that. Like what it's like for you when your anger is popping up. What's the vulnerability who met the courage to popping up? And then maybe this can be useful for some validation or reflection or as a compass that can guide you later exploring.
It's a good self of the therapist exercise that you guys are both kind of saying is, something we can do as therapists outside of session, which will only help us in session, is think about our own anger and maybe focus inward. If there's something under our anger that maybe without the anger, we don't feel like we have the courage to say, I love that vulnerability meets courage, right? And that our anger gives us this felt sense of courage or empowerment to speak, but then the way we speak can sort of block the heart of the vulnerability and the message. So really leaning in, and I love what you're saying, George, is sort of meet yourself in that anger and be curious, right? When I'm angry, right here, right now, I'm really pissed. What is my anger about for myself? If I give myself permission, I have a good reason to be angry. What is it that my anger is trying to say about my experience right here that's doesn't feel like it's getting heard or understood? It needs to be heard and understood. And then often your own nugget around your anger, around your pain becomes a lot more clear. And then when that becomes clear, and I do this with my therapist, like, oh, and my clients, oh, share that, right? And it goes a lot better. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Super exciting. And hopefully we're going to be getting together a workshop with both George and Giulia. George and Giulia, awesome. So stay tuned. You can check out Southern Nevada EFT for more information to keep posted and up to date on new events as they come up. But George and Giulia, how do folks find you if they want to look up where your trainings are or if you have any extra projects? I know, Giulia, you're all over Instagram and doing a lot of good work. So can you let everyone know where to find you guys?
Yeah, so for me, for Italian, there is, of course, the website of EFT Italy, and maybe the details will be written down the video. But for the international part, it's more through Instagram, actually. But soon it will be a part of the website also in English with more reference.
Excellent.
And about that, I don't know if, but speaking about the reactivity and speaking about we connect reactivity and pursuer, there is also a workshop that just it's popping up on pursuers and through the life and music of Janis Joplin. So it's something that I'm working and.
So you're doing some workshops on like escalated pursuers, working with that pursuer energy.
Actually, it goes through that to reach the pursuer softening event.
Nice.
Through the music of Janis.
And where do they find information about that workshop? Was that on your website?
It will be soon on the website. It's on Instagram and it will be through the EFT community in Chicago, I think.
Okay. And maybe posted on ICEEFT under the trainings?
Of course.
Perfect. Always, guys, yeah. ICEEFT.com, ICEEFT.com. So there's a double E, and they have a list of trainings that are going on around the globe at all times. And I'll post a link to Giulia's Instagram and her website on the description for this video. George, you got successandvulnerability.com going on. Where else can folks find you?
Well, that's a good spot to get specific training on escalated couples. We got some sessions there demonstrating that. I mean, georgefowler.com will have my trainings when I remember to put them up there, and check out Foreplay Radio Podcast. Because again, this is escalation. We also got to learn how to work with escalation in the sexual cycle, right? People have these same moves where they just can't open themselves up sexually because they're defensive, and we have the same patterns, the same reactivity, and most couples have no practice on how to lean into the sexual cycle and be curious about the defenses. So get the training.
So Foreplay Radio Podcast, you guys can listen to that anywhere that you find your podcast platforms. It's George and Lori Watson, and they talk about all things sex and relationships. I always tell my clients, they talk about everything from anger to anal sex, and everything in between. It's beautiful. And a great resource for your clients if you haven't turned them on to Foreplay Radio. So I'll make sure to put the link for that, as well as Success and Vulnerability and George's website, in the description for this video. And of course, make sure that you guys follow them on social media. You look at their websites or find information about the most up-to-date trainings on ICEEFT.com. And you guys know you can always find me here on social media, and as well our trainings for Southern Nevada EFT in Las Vegas. Come hang out with us. There's usually listed on ICEEFT as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and being with us today. And we're so excited to hear more from you guys in the future. And thank you to all of our viewers for listening and following and giving feedback. Keep it up, and make sure that you hit subscribe, because more videos are on the way. Don't forget to buy my book, Using Relentless Empathy in the Therapeutic Relationship, Connecting with Challenging and Resistant Clients for Helping Professionals. Available on Amazon or on my website, www.drbugatti.com.